Cambridge Preparation for the Toefl Test, 4th edition. CD8. Practice Test 2. Listening section. Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, so today we're going to continue with a discussion about the aquatic environment. Specifically, I'm interested here in some of the adaptations that make survival possible in estuary conditions. Now, as you know, the thing about the estuarine environment is that because the tide washes in and out twice a day, the salinity, that is the amount or proportion of salt in the water, varies or can vary considerably throughout any 24-hour period. When the tide is out, the water may be near freshwater levels, and when the tide is in, the levels of salt may be more like seawater. When the water's in between seawater and freshwater, it's called brackish water. By this term, we mean water that is typically less than 30 parts per thousand of salt. So, plants and animals that live in this environment must be able to adapt to these constant changes in the saltiness of the estuary waters. So, what are the kinds of adaptations that estuarine organisms have developed? Well, the most important are either physiological and/or behavioral. Regarding the first, the physiological, the bodily adaptations tend to be associated with maintaining the right balance of salinity within the body. Some organisms, generally known as osmoregulators, control their internal concentrations of water salinity when the external environment changes. This word, of course, refers to osmosis, which you don't need me to define osmosis, do you? Good, okay. Usually this kind of creature is less permeable to water and salt. Crabs are a very good example. Crabs that live in the estuarine environment keep out both water and salt with their hard shells. But in addition, they may have internal organs and cell functions which can regulate salt intake and excretion. Also, certain species of fish, which adjust to differing saline conditions, have specialized kidneys, gills, and skin. Specialized kidneys and gills are able to switch between excreting more or less water and also between absorbing more or less salt as conditions permit. So, the combined properties of gills, kidneys, and an impermeable skin allow them to live in conditions of varying salinity. Plants as well as animals may use osmoregulation to survive, since in saline habitats, salt levels can reach deadly levels. A common species of grass known as smooth cordgrass has adapted through its complex root system. These roots are able to remove salts from the water they take in. Such plants can also expel salt through their leaves, and in some species, they can also shed leaves that become loaded with excess salt. Okay, so what about the behavioral factors that help creatures exist in the estuary? Well, a common adaptation, especially among invertebrates, that is, creatures without backbones, is the ability to dig or burrow into the soft mud. Now, of course, this helps them avoid being eaten by predators, such as birds or fish. But it's also an important advantage for species that cannot osmoregulate, cannot control the concentration of salt solution in their bodies. This is because below the surface of the mud, the concentration of salt is less than in the open water above. And what's more, the temperature is less variable, which is also beneficial for creatures that don't tolerate changes of temperature. On the other hand, creatures such as oysters and clams don't like to have too low a level of salt. So these organisms simply close their shells tightly when the level of salt becomes too low, during low tides. At this point, they stop feeding and stop breathing through their gills. When the high tide returns and the oxygen and salt levels increase, they open their shells and feed and breathe oxygen again. Other creatures are more mobile, and this too, by the way, is a behavioral adaptation, They can move upstream or downstream as conditions require. Certain crabs live in low salt areas because they can osmoregulate, but their young may not have developed this ability. So during breeding season, such species may move to areas in the sea with higher levels of saline. In the blue crab, for example, the females migrate to water of high salinity to hatch their young. Then the new generation of crabs moves back to fresher water as they develop into adults. So, does that make sense?
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 1. What is the lecture mainly about? 2. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Some organisms, generally known as osmoregulators, control their internal concentrations of water salinity when the external environment changes. This word, of course, refers to osmosis, which you don't need me to define osmosis, do you?
What does the professor imply when he says this?
This word, of course, refers to osmosis, which you don't need me to define osmosis, do you?
Three. What two adaptations are mentioned that allow crabs to survive in the estuary environment? Four. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Certain crabs live in low salt areas because they can osmoregulate, but their young may not have developed this ability. So during breeding season, such species may move to areas in the sea with higher levels of saline. In the blue crab, for example, the females migrate to water of high salinity to hatch their young. Then the new generation of crabs moves back to fresher water as they develop into adults. So, does that make sense?
Why does the professor say this?
So, does that make sense?
Five. Indicate whether each word or phrase below describes a physiological adaptation or behavioral adaptation. Six. The adaptations of which estuarine creature are not discussed in the lecture? Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor James?
Yes?
I was told that I should talk to you about, well, I'm interested in switching majors and I wanted some advice.
Okay. So, I assume you're switching to a degree in linguistics. Could you give me some background on your previous studies?
Yeah, I was studying speech pathology, specializing in phonological disorders. But I went to Peru last summer and, well, I ran out of money, and to pay for my expenses, I did some English teaching, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay. So, are you thinking about a degree in applied linguistics?
Well, yeah, with my background in phonology, I was able to help people improve their pronunciation, and I thought that perhaps I'd be more interested in that aspect of language.
Okay. Well, some of your courses will probably fulfill linguistic requirements, and many of them will be advantageous for you as far as the knowledge is concerned, but not necessarily for course transfer.
Okay.
Let me find Oh, here it is. This is an overview of the course requirements. Do you have a copy of your transcripts with you?
Yeah. Here you go.
Thank you. Okay. Well, besides the courses you've had in phonology, your language development course will transfer, sociolinguistics and psycholinguistics, and, of course, all your general electives.
Excuse me, could you hang on a second? I want to mark the courses that will transfer.
Here's a pen.
Oh, thank you. Okay, language development, sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics. Okay.
Now, the linguistics department requires 2 foreign languages. I see you have Spanish. The second language should be one that is not so commonly used.
What about the courses I've taken in American Sign Language? We had to be fluent in signing in order to communicate with people who have hearing disabilities.
I'm not sure if we can count your sign language courses, and at this point I'd rather err on the side of caution and tell you that it doesn't fulfill the requirement.
That seems reasonable. So, Spanish will transfer, and I'll put a question mark beside the American Sign Language courses.
Well, just at a glance, I would say that this change of major may only set you back by a semester or 2.
Are you calculating that based on the average number of classes that students take per term?
Well, yes. Would graduating later be a problem?
It might be.
I suppose that if you were to carry a heavier course load, you might be able to finish on schedule. But since some of the higher-level courses have prerequisites, your taking on more courses per semester may not necessarily enable you to graduate as soon as you'd like.
Well, I need to look into all options. I might be able to get more funding.
Okay. Well, why don't you take the overview I gave you and continue crossing out the courses you won't have to take? Then check the courses that you must take and see which ones have prerequisites and which ones you could take at the same time. Circle the ones you have questions about and feel free to come back to see me during my office hours.
Okay. I guess I'll have to see if I can get another grant or a loan or something as well. Do I need to make an appointment to see you?
No, just show up during my office hours. And in the meantime, I'll try to find out if the American Sign Language course can be used to fulfill your language requirement.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, here's your pen.
Thank you.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 7. Why does the student go to see the professor? 8. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Okay. So, I assume you're switching to a degree in linguistics. Could you give me some background on your previous studies?
What can be inferred about the professor? 9. Why does the student want to change degree programs? 10. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
I'm not sure if we can count your sign language courses, and at this point I'd rather err on the side of caution and tell you that it doesn't fulfill the requirement.
Why does the professor say this?
At this point I'd rather err on the side of caution.
11. What can be inferred about the student? 'Listen to a discussion in an education class.
Okay, up until now, we've been discussing the questions we as teachers construct for our students in order to encourage their thought process. But today, I want to look at the issue of asking questions from a different direction. Now, young children are full of questions. But once they're in the school system, the role reverses and the teacher becomes the primary questioner. Now, according to various studies, teachers ask between 300 and 400 questions a day in the average elementary school. Unfortunately, as children get older, they stop asking their own questions. By the time students are in a university, last week I walked out of the elementary literacy course I teach feeling kind of discouraged because not one of my students had asked me a question. Did they know it all? And consequently, was I wasting my time and theirs? Were they so lost that they found it impossible to ask questions? Was I such a great lecturer that they understood everything perfectly? What is it that keeps students from asking questions? Anybody? Annie?
Well, I think it's hard for us to admit in front of our classmates that we don't understand something. I mean, nobody wants to feel stupid.
So, in other words, you look around at your classmates and think everybody else understands this, so I must be a real idiot?
Well, sometimes I think that, even though I know that if I don't understand a concept, probably several of my classmates don't understand it either.
Okay, what Annie is describing is the primary negative pressure that we as teachers need to constantly try to help students overcome. So, let me write that on the board. Negative pressures. And for item number 1, I'll write the fear of appearing stupid. Okay. Can you think of other factors that keep students from asking questions?
Well, maybe this is another aspect of feeling stupid, but I think class size counts. This is a small class and we all know each other. I don't feel as intimidated asking a question in front of a small group of people I trust.
I can see why Tony might think class size is relevant to feeling stupid, but I think there's more to it than that. I mean, when you ask a question in one of the large lecture halls, sometimes you have to repeat it several times because the professor can't hear you, and, that is embarrassing.
Yeah, and sometimes a question is asked that the professor heard, but the students in the back of the class couldn't hear, and so the professor's answer is meaningless.
Okay, so in other words, large class size discourages meaningful dialogue, both in terms of the room size and the number of students. I'm going to write this as large class size pressure. Lisa.
It's not just large class sizes that make one feel uncomfortable. Sometimes it's more difficult to ask a question just because everyone knows everyone else. But lost in the crowd, it might, in fact, be easier to talk.
Okay, I can see that. So let me erase large. There, class size pressure. Anything more to add?
Time pressure.
Time pressure? Can you expand on that?
Professor Clarkson.
Professor Clarkson? I seem to have missed the joke.
Professor Clarkson is sort of the epitome of time pressure.
Yeah, he dashes through his lectures as if he were trying to cram the entire field of child development into one class session.
Yeah, it's like he doesn't even stop to breathe. I feel intimidated about stopping his lecture with a mere question.
Okay, I think we have 2 negative pressures going on here. Time pressure, as Lisa said, and personality. A teacher's personality seems to deter students from asking questions.
It's not exactly personality. I mean, Professor Clarkson is a really nice man and a good lecturer.
Okay, but isn't it the signal he sends of being in a hurry that keeps you from asking questions?
Yes, but, when someone does get the courage to ask Professor Clarkson a question, he never gives the impression that his time is being wasted. I think the type of teacher personality that keeps students from asking questions is, sometimes a teacher makes a sarcastic joke at the student's expense.
Okay, so you do agree that personality may keep students from asking questions, even though you don't think it applies to Professor Clarkson. So, personality. Does anyone have any more to add? No? Okay, so now I'd like you to split into groups of 3. In your groups, I'd like you to discuss possible ways teachers can promote question asking in the classroom. Now, keep in mind the negative pressures we've discussed. Oh, and by the way, there are other pressures that were not mentioned, but I think you'll come up with them in your discussions. I'll ask you to share your thoughts in, say, 20 minutes.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 12. What is the discussion mainly about? 13. Why does the professor say this?
Did they know it all? And consequently, was I wasting my time and theirs? Were they so lost that they found it impossible to ask questions? Was I such a great lecturer that they understood everything perfectly?
"14. Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Well, maybe this is another aspect of feeling stupid, but I think class size counts. This is a small class and we all know each other. I don't feel as intimidated asking a question in front of a small group of people I trust.
You know, I can see why Tony might think class size is relevant to feeling stupid, but I think there's more to it than that. I mean, well, when you ask a question in one of the large lecture halls, sometimes you have to repeat it several times because the professor can't hear you, and, well, that is embarrassing.
What can be inferred about the students? "15. Why does Lisa mention Professor Clarkson? 16. In the discussion, the professor elicits different reasons why students don't ask questions. Indicate whether each of the following is one of the discussed fears. "17. Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
In your groups, I'd like you to discuss possible ways teachers can promote question asking in the classroom. Now, keep in mind the negative pressures we've discussed. Oh, and by the way, there are other pressures that were not mentioned, but I think you'll come up with them in your discussions.
Why does the professor say this?
By the way, there are other pressures that were not mentioned.
Listen to in a History of Ideas class.
I want to talk about what was once a very popular way of studying character based on the shape of the skull. This theory, what was known as phrenology, was started by a German doctor named Franz Gall around the year 1800. What Gall proposed was that it was possible to determine character by feeling or reading the bumps on a person's head. I want to discuss here the basic principles of this theory, what it claimed to be able to do, and then why it became unfashionable and disappeared. Finally, I want to ask whether it contributed anything to our knowledge about the brain. So, what were some of the important features of phrenology? Gall said that the brain is the organ of the mind, that our talents and mental abilities stem from the brain. Furthermore, he said that the brain is composed of several distinct organs, and that each of the brain's faculties has a separate organ in a separate part of the brain. What's more, the size of any organ is a reflection of its power, and hence importance in the makeup of an individual's character. He also claimed that the overall shape of the brain is determined by the development of the organs which it contains. He argued that the outside skull takes on the shape of the brain which it encloses, and therefore the surface of the skull can be taken as an accurate reflection of the shape of the brain, and thus of a person's psychological tendencies and aptitudes. So how did it work? Well, a phrenologist would run his fingers over a person's head, examining every bump or indentation. So, for example, a protuberance, a bump in, say, the forehead, would indicate that the person had a pronounced tendency to be benevolent, since the organ of benevolence was supposedly in that location. An indentation somewhere else would mean a weakly developed attribute, say, a poor memory. Now, these things were the basic ideas of phrenology as practiced throughout the early 19th century. So widespread was this theory that many people would consult phrenologists before, for example, hiring an employee, or even, say, finding a marriage partner. Proponents also tried to determine a person's predisposition to crime or dishonesty. And unfortunately, at one stage, some scientists tried to justify notions such as criminal tendency or racial superiority through skull readings. At the peak of its popularity, phrenology was widely practiced in both North America and Europe. So, you're probably thinking all this is really bizarre, right? Well, so did some people back then. In truth, there had always been dissenting voices. The theory was made fun of and criticized by various individuals from its earliest appearance. So, what happened to phrenology? Well, educated people lost interest as more academic approaches to psychology became common. It was noticed by some that phrenologists tended to seek confirmation for their hypotheses while ignoring counter-examples. Suppose a person was said after a reading to have a marked tendency towards, let's say, honesty, but then exhibited strongly dishonest personality traits. It would be clear that the analysis was not accurate. Phrenologists tended to dogmatically reject or explain away falsifying evidence, such as this example shows. Have we learned anything from this theory? Well, I would like to argue that there was some value in it. First of all, it was an important step historically to emphasize that the brain was the organ of the mind, that thinking and feeling were done through the brain. Furthermore, phrenologists were important in arguing that brain functions were localized, that some parts of the brain were specialized for certain abilities. We learned anything from this theory? Well, I would like to argue that there was some value in it. First of all, it was an important step historically to emphasize that the brain was the organ of the mind, that thinking and feeling were done through the brain. Furthermore, phrenologists were important in arguing that brain functions were localized, that some parts of the brain were specialized for certain abilities. Nowadays, of course, we know that this is only partly true. Some parts of the brain appear to be very much involved with certain functions, whereas many abilities seem to be distributed throughout the brain rather than in one location. So, to sum up, we can say that phrenology was of some scientific value, although many, if not most, of its ideas have been superseded.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 18. What is the lecture mainly about? 19. What points does the professor make about Gall's phrenological theory? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
At the peak of its popularity, phrenology was widely practiced in both North America and Europe. So, you're probably thinking all this is really bizarre, right?
Why does the professor say this?
So, you're probably thinking all this is really bizarre, right?
According to the professor, how did phrenologists approach evidence? Listen to in an astronomy class.
Today, I'd like to discuss an interesting research area for space scientists. So I think most of you have heard of the term terraforming. For those of you who haven't, let me just repeat that terraforming is the name given to the process of transforming a planet from its current conditions into a planet something like the Earth. That is, changing the temperature and the atmospheric conditions so that it is livable for humans and other life forms found on Earth. I know this sounds a lot like science fiction, but a lot of scientists are beginning to take this idea seriously. So why would we want to do this? Go to such an immense expenditure in terms of money, resources, time?
Excuse me, Professor. Are you serious? What a waste. That's assuming it's possible.
Well, it could be very useful in the future if the population of the world got so out of hand that the resources on Earth couldn't support the number of people here. I think some people would say that we've already reached that point.
Okay, yeah. The pressure on resources of a rapidly expanding population has always forced people to migrate in search of new territory. We could say that human migrations have, historically, and even prehistorically, occurred when populations have grown too much for the available space. Think of the migrations to the Americas from Europe and elsewhere. But let's get back to the problem of terraforming. How could this possibly be done? Let's take Mars. This is the planet most scientists think of when talking about terraforming. It's certainly the best candidate, at least in our solar system. The other planets are much less suitable for all kinds of reasons. At least Mars has water in ice form and a solid surface. But remember, it has a very thin atmosphere made up largely of carbon dioxide and almost no oxygen. Its temperature averages about minus 60 degrees Celsius, and as far as we can tell, it's completely lifeless.
So wait a minute. You're saying we could change this into an Earth-like environment? That's a total waste of resources. What about using that money to improve the Earth? And don't we have to ask ourselves whether we have the right to tamper with unspoiled environments?
I don't agree with you there. I mean, if we can do it, it would be worth it to have so much more living space, and no one actually lives there, on Mars. We wouldn't be spoiling it for any life form. Mars is lifeless. If we could turn it into a habitable planet, I think it's worth a shot.
Okay, there are certainly ethical considerations, and they are sure to lead to heated debate. But let's just think about the practicalities for now. What kind of technology could make this possible anyway? Several suggestions have been made on how we could raise the temperature. One suggestion is that we put up huge orbital mirrors to reflect sunlight onto the surface. Another one is that asteroids containing great amounts of ammonia could be forced to smash into the planet. Ammonia is a greenhouse gas, so that would also have the effect of raising the temperature. Those are just two of the ideas which have been discussed. Now, once the temperature has been raised, The ice at the poles would melt, and the water could be used to sustain life. At first, this could be plant life introduced from Earth. Finally, after perhaps thousands of years, the plants would have given off enough oxygen to transform the atmosphere into one in which animals and eventually humans could survive.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 24. What is the discussion mainly about? 25. Why does the professor say this?
I know this sounds a lot like science fiction.
26. Why does the professor mention the migration of Europeans to the Americas? 27. According to the professor, why is Mars the planet that scientists want to terraform? 28. Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Okay, there are certainly ethical considerations, and they are sure to lead to heated debate. But let's just think about the practicalities for now.
Why does the professor say this?
But let's just think about the practicalities for now.
29. Which of the following is not mentioned as a method of terraforming Mars? 'Listen to conversation between a student and a research coordinator.
Yes, can I help you?
Yes, I'm here about that announcement on the bulletin board, about your needing participants in an experiment.
Okay. We have several doctoral projects needing participants. Which one in particular are you interested in?
Oh, I didn't realize there was more than one. The one I saw was about a food experiment. One about how food affects mood.
Oh, that's Kenny's experiment. Yeah. Can I ask you some questions? Personal ones, to see if you meet the requirements?
Sure, why not?
First, are you diabetic or do you have any allergies to any common foods or food additives?
No, not that I know of.
Okay. Are you currently on any type of diet or taking any medication?
No. These are the questions on the notice that's on the bulletin board, aren't they?
Yeah, but we have to go through all of them with volunteers, because some people don't read the notices carefully and really aren't suitable for the experiment. We also need you to sign an agreement of participation, stating that you've understood all the requirements and are willing to take part in the study.
Okay, that makes sense.
Are you suffering from any cold, flu, or respiratory problems?
Well, not this week.
Oh, okay. If you do come down with a cold next week while the experiment's going on, we would like you to notify us and drop out.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
Have you ever been diagnosed with an eating disorder?
No.
Okay, now let me explain what we need you to do. You're not supposed to eat anything in the morning before coming into the lab. That's the pharmacology lab on the second floor of the red brick building behind the student center. So every morning, all next week, you're to come to the lab for breakfast.
Great.
And you are expected to eat it, whether you like the breakfast or not.
It won't be too strange, will it? Like pickled onions or grasshoppers?
No, that won't be anything like that. Now where was I?
Eating all my breakfast, whether I like it or not.
Oh, right. Breakfast will consist of the normal things, like eggs or cereal, different each day, though. After breakfast, you'll be given some tests that look at your responses to certain interactive stimuli on a computer. Then you're free to go. But we need you back about 2 hours later for a snack. And you're not supposed to have any outside snacks before coming back for our snack. The snacks are yogurt or nuts, candy bars, potato chips, typical snacks, really, followed by some more interactive tests.
Okay, sounds fun.
Yeah, I've volunteered for it myself. Now, let's look at the schedule. It's very important that you can make all the sessions.
Does it have to be exactly the same time every morning? That could be a problem for me.
No. Yeah. I mean, you can have breakfast at a different time every day, but the snack has to be 2 hours after the breakfast. We've tried to set times so participants could have breakfast before going off to class and get back for the snack.
Oh, okay. Yes, I can fit into your schedule times every day.
Great. Can you mark the times that you'll be coming on this schedule? And, sign this consent form.
Sure.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 30. Why has the student gone to see the research coordinator? 31. Why does the research coordinator ask the student personal questions? 32. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Are you suffering from any cold, flu, or respiratory problems?
Well, not this week.
Why does the student say this?
Well, not this week.
33. Which of the following topics does the research coordinator not ask the student about? 34. What example does the research coordinator give of the breakfast that will be provided? 'Speaking. 1. Please listen carefully. A good teacher should have some special qualities. What qualities do you think are necessary for a good teacher to have, and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. You may begin to prepare your response after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. 2. Please listen carefully. Some people believe that people who play video games are learning important life skills. Others believe that video game players are wasting their time. Which view do you agree with, and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. You may begin to prepare your response after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Three. Please listen carefully. The University of the Rockies newspaper has published a letter to the editor concerning a university policy. Read the letter about the hiring of temporary instructors. You will have 45 seconds to read the letter. Begin reading now. Now listen to two students as they discuss the issue brought up in the letter.
I thought university teachers were well paid. I mean, they have to have advanced degrees and be experienced to teach here, don't they?
Yeah, but I've heard that over 60% of our teachers are temporary.
Really? Well, I don't think my education is suffering because of it. Do you?
Well, it's kind of hard to know, isn't it? I mean, part-timers have to hold down another job, so they can't concentrate on course development.
That's true. But I still think my teachers are pretty well prepared.
Yeah, me too. But there are other drawbacks to having part-time teachers too, like, well, I needed to see my literature instructor, but arranging a time was difficult because she also works at the city library. And then our meeting wasn't private because temporary staff members share offices.
Really?
Uh-huh. And they don't have a voice in departmental issues or access to university funding.
Wow. I can't imagine they feel any loyalty to the university at all.
Now get ready to answer the question. The man expresses his opinion on the issue of temporary instructors. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for that opinion. You may begin to prepare your response after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Four, please listen carefully. Read the passage about imprinting in baby birds. You have 45 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in an ecology class.
So, we've been looking at animal behavior, and especially the process of imprinting in young birds. Of course, the first thing a young gosling sees when it hatches is its mother. Now, birds that walk almost immediately after hatching, as opposed to those who are helpless and can't get around for several weeks, have to follow their mother for their own safety, for their survival. It seems that walking birds will follow just about anything that moves and has eyes. In fact, we've seen that they will easily imprint on human beings. But some researchers have gone even further. One set of experiments, for example, has found that young geese will imprint on inanimate objects, such as plastic milk bottles that are attached to a moving object, like an electric toy train. Now, it seems that in some species of birds, and this includes nesting birds, which are helpless after hatching, imprinting can affect later learning and social behavior. For example, territorial behavior. If a human takes on the role of the parent, the bird's social behavior becomes directed at the wrong object or species. A bird that sees a human as one of its own kind and follows or accompanies a human will not understand the importance of keeping to its own territory. This is why wildlife specialists tell us not to try to raise young birds that we find outside a nest. If the bird becomes attached to us, it can't learn to associate with its own species and would quickly be rejected.
Now get ready to answer the question. The professor explains the notion of imprinting in young geese and ducks. Explain how this behavior develops and how it might be important for the bird's survival. You may begin to prepare your response after the beep. Please begin speaking. Please begin speaking after the 5. Please listen carefully. Listen to a conversation between two students.
I just finished my history project.
That must feel nice. It takes me so long to do Professor Madison's assignments.
Really? Well, what do you think the problem is? Do you have trouble understanding the task?
It's not a matter of understanding the material. My problem is technical. You know how he wants us to turn in the projects on disk? Well, I'm just computer illiterate. I write out all my assignments by hand.
Wow. Well, you could pay someone to type up your handwritten work. There are always ads on the bulletin board of people willing to do that for a fee.
That's an idea. But it could get too expensive after a while.
Yeah, I imagine it would. Oh, why don't you go on over to the Study Skills Center? Maybe they could direct you to some online sites that give typing lessons you can do on your own time. You know, they may even hold some beginning word processing classes.
Do you think so?
Well, I don't know for sure, but it's worth a try. And another thing you should do is sign up for a beginning computer course. You know, the world is getting more technical every day, and if you really want to fit into the job market, you should learn everything you can about computers while you're here and have all these available resources.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Now get ready to answer the question. The students discuss different solutions to the woman's problem. Describe the problem. Then state which of the solutions you prefer and why. You may begin to prepare your response after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Six. Please listen carefully. Listen to part of a lecture in an architecture class.
When planning a structure, engineers must consider the internal and external forces the structure must withstand. These are called loads. Broadly speaking, there are two types of loads: static and dynamic. Now, static loads concern those forces that don't change, and dynamic loads are those that change abruptly. First, let's look at static loads, which can be broken down into dead loads and live loads. Dead loads concern the weight distribution that the structure itself must bear. These would include beams, walls, floors, ceilings, and roofs. Calculating dead loads is quite straightforward. Now, live loads are those other weights that a structure must support. Live loads can be people, furniture, or, in the case of a bridge, cars and trucks. You may wonder why live loads like people or cars are considered static, since we move around all the time. Well, you may wonder why live loads like people or cars are considered static, since we move around all the time. Well, we can calculate how many people will fit into this classroom, say, or how many trucks can be on a bridge at the same time. Our comings and goings flow. They do not happen abruptly. Imagine that your family is sitting in different parts of a room and someone says, "Oh, look, Northern Lights." So everyone rushes to the same window to look outside. The live load changes from the weight being evenly distributed to its being concentrated at one point. Like dead loads, live load calculations can be computed. Now, remember that I said dynamic loads are those in which the forces change suddenly. For example, a gust of wind. Extreme examples of dynamic loads are tidal waves, hurricanes, or earthquakes. Think about earthquake zones. Here the engineer must consider features that allow the building to withstand or, let's say, counteract a sudden change of force, a force that is unpredictable.
Now get ready to answer the question. Using points and examples from the lecture, explain the kinds of loads an engineer must consider when building a structure. You may begin to prepare your response after the beep. Writing. Now listen to a professor's response to the reading passage.
Now, in this course, we've focused on the need for judging unusual claims with strong empirical evidence. I want you to take a fresh look at the claims here. Many people will accept dowsing without question, just assuming that somehow underground water does or can be detected because it gives off invisible frequencies. Can we accept this? On the face of it, this is an unusual claim, since it seems to go against the laws of physics. Now, I've said before, and I'll repeat it here, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But first of all, these forces, or whatever, that are supposed to be given off by objects are unknown to science. Attempts made with very sensitive instruments have not been able to detect them. Think about it. We have instruments that can detect weak radio signals from distant objects in space, but we can't detect signals from a nearby material that is claimed to exert a strong pull on dowsing tools. Furthermore, there have been numerous attempts to test what we might call the dowsing hypothesis, to test whether under strict scientific conditions it still works. It's been found that when the experiment is, when all the variables are controlled, that dowsing doesn't work. The results it gives are no better than random luck. In other words, if you dig for water anywhere at all, you would have a chance of finding it. The same kind of chance that a dowser would have. So, under strict conditions, dowsers have about the same chance as anyone with a hunch. Now, when experiments have been performed without strict conditions attached, it seems that dowsing can be successful. I'd like you to think about this and come with your own ideas tomorrow on how this could be possible.
Summarize the points made in the lecture you just heard, explaining how they cast doubt on the points made in the reading. This is the end of the audio program. Thank you for listening.